And like most of the people of Alexandria, he was a speaker of Greek, because Greek was the dominant language of Alexandria and of the upper classes of all Egypt during the Ptolemaic period. And when Clement came in, Clement is very important because he begins to introduce a lot of theological changes that will lead to things like the establishment of the doctrine of Trinity, which took almost 400 years, by the way. The Trinity does not become established as a Christian doctrine until the end of the 4th century. But one of the things about Clement is that he knows Greek extremely well. And he begins to use eloquent Greek. He begins to use Athenian Greek. He uses the Greek of Plato and Aristotle. And the Christian community of Alexandria attacked him for that very severely, because they regarded this as an unacceptable innovation. And that's because of the fact that they believed that as Christians they were not allowed to speak like that. That their language had to remain very simple and very humble. In any case, we're not held to that standard, but again, that standard, to the extent that it was set for the Jews and the Christians in the early period, one of the reasons for it also was so that the teaching be clear, and so that it not be convoluted. And in order to bring the doctrine of Trinity into Christianity, you couldn't use that language. You had to begin to use a highly philosophical, highly metaphysical Greek in which you could talk about things which ordinary people would simply say were contradictions. That Jesus cannot be man and God. Jesus cannot be human and be uncreated, and so forth. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, أنا وأتقياء أمتي براء من التكلف. I and the righteous of my ummah are free of artificiality. We are free also of excessive formality. This pertains to speech, and it also, of course, pertains to actions. And this should be our standard. The Prophet ﷺ directed us to be proper, to be natural, to be real, and to avoid all unnecessary artificialities. Al-Ghazali warns us that artificiality in speech, as for example in stilted or affected speech, obscure speech, usually reflects riya. It usually reflects the hypocrisy of show. And even if it doesn't reflect that, it can easily lead to that. We draw attention to ourselves. We draw attention to our eloquence and to our language gifts and to our personal gifts. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, إِنَّ أَبْغَضَكُمْ إِلَيَّ وَأَبْعَدَكُمْ مِنِّي مَجْلِسًا الثرثارون المتفيقهون المتشدقون في الكلام. Very eloquent speech, but speech to talk about those kind of people who use stilted speech. And this speech is not stilted, but it's very, very specific. He said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the most strongly disliked of you, or hateful of you to me, and the furthest seated from me on the day of judgment, will be those who keep rambling on. The thartharun, they talk and talk and talk. Who are long-winded, mutafayqihun, and who are high-sounding and affected, mutashaddiqun, in speech. Again, Ibn Athir, when he talks about this, he says, why are these people disliked? Why are these people put at such a great distance from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And he says this is because they are not concerned about truth or falsehood in what they say. They are simply concerned about themselves. And they speak and they speak, and they don't care if what they say is true or if what they say is false. So the purpose of their speech is something else. And also because truth is not the standard that they hold themselves to, then much of what they say is without caution and without care, and it brings in many things that are harmful and many things that are misleading and that are easily misunderstood. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in Muslim, "Ala halaka al-mutanatti'un, ala halaka al-mutanatti'un, ala halaka al-mutanatti'un." And tanattu', he said, truly the overly fussy, the overly detailed, and also mutanatti' can be extremist, the person who is severe in the way they behave or the way they practice their religion will perish. Surely these people will perish. And they are people who in word and deed are overly meticulous, overly detailed to a fault, who are extremely fussy in the wording that they use, and who go to extremes and excesses in that and in other things. Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, said, "Inna shaqashiq al-kalam min shaqashiqi al-shaytan." He said, rambling types of speech, shaqashiq al-kalam, come from the ramblings of Satan. Imam Ali, may Allah be pleased with him, he said, like Umar, "Inna kathiran min al-khutabi min shaqashiq al-shaytan." That many of the speeches that we give, and khutab here is not just the Friday khutbah, but many of the speeches that people give are simply the ramblings and the ramblings on of Satan. Again, they say that because people who ramble on and who are not careful about what they say, who do not take themselves for account, they're not thinking about what they're saying. Often what they say involves falsity, lies, absurdities that necessarily come into that speech. And they don't pay attention to that, and they don't care about it. Okay, the next thing that we want to talk about is obscenity and profanity. In Arabic, the word that Imam al-Ghazali uses here, akramakumullah, is al-fuhsh. Al-fuhsh. And al-fuhsh in Arabic refers to all words and deeds that expose and make explicit wrongful things, sinful things, ugly things, things that ordinary people, normal people, and good people regard to be ugly, and things that they would never expose. Okay, so when that is brought to light, that is called fuhsh. It is called obscenity and profanity. Usually the word fuhsh in Arabic is very closely associated with zina, akramakumullah, with adultery and fornication. And even if it's not explicitly connected with that, often the spreading of profanities opens the door to that and to other things that are connected with it. It applies also, however, to other ugly traits in word and deed, things that people regard to be shameful and to be ugly. Imam al-Ghazali emphasizes, as we all know, that obscenity is forbidden. It is not just disliked, it is forbidden, it is aib, it is haram. And he also notes, though, that obscenity has degrees. And we need to be very conscious of that. Because he says that usually obscenity begins with things which are not clearly obscene. It begins things that just sort of explore the limits. How far can we go? How much can we say? And in that, it is trying to push the boundaries. We talked about this last time, that one of the developments in our world today, and again, I speak about my own country, and we can speak about the West in general, is the fact that profanity and obscenity have become everyday customs. And they were not that way 50 years ago. They were not that way at all years ago. You couldn't speak profanities. You didn't say that in public, you didn't say it in private, you certainly didn't say it with your family, you certainly didn't say it on the radio or television. And today that has changed, and you can see, if you do a study of that, how it begins with minor obscenities or borderline obscenities, things that you don't really know, is this something we should say or not? And then the limits are pushed. And then the obscenities actually come. And they're shocking, and there will be people who respond to them, and there will be people who condemn them, and maybe they stop, and then they start again. And then ultimately you get to a state, which is like the state we're in today, when many obscenities, are used even as part of ordinary speech. When I came back, to the United States, there were words that were being used that I couldn't believe they were being used, because those words were so ugly 20 years ago that no one would ever say them, and now it just becomes ordinary speech, even among Muslims, maybe even in an Islamic speech. So the borders are pushed, and then the obscenities come in, and we have obscenities in comedy, we have obscenities in music, and some musicians will tell you, of course, there are types of music that don't have obscenity. There's types of music that are reverent, that are beautiful, that make you think, and they don't use that. But then there are other types of music that have an appeal, especially to young people, and this is often filled with profanities. And you may have a Muslim musician, I know some like that, who want to use their music to communicate to the young people and to try to show them the truth. And they will say, but how can we do that? Because of the fact that if we don't use profanities, we won't be listened to. Because many young people, they take the use of profanities in the music as an indication of the fact that it's worth listening to. And the same thing with comedy. So these are very big problems, and they lead to bigger and greater things. Also, as we said, obscenity is not just in language. Obscenity can be in dress. It can be in other things that we do. Pornography is one of the greatest obscenities of all, and this is one of the plagues of our times. And the pornography also is extremely destructive to our psychologies. It's extremely destructive to marriage. It even, according to some people, leads to, it opens the door to totalitarian oppression. That if you want to have freedom, if you want to have what we call human rights, pornography will destroy that. Because, and pornography always involves the degradation of women. And anyone who looks at pornography is basically, it's like you must have a problem with women. You probably have a problem with your own wife, maybe even with your own daughters, because it is in its very essence a degradation and an insult to all women. And if you degrade things like this, then everything else after that can be degraded. The Bosnian genocide, which was one of the horrible events, of the end of the 20th century, the Serbs were fed pornography day and night. It was even on their military vehicles. And this was consciously done so that they could do the genocide they were doing. And of course they did many horrible things to women and to children, as you know. But pornography was an essential part of that. And, so we have to be aware of these things. And, we have in the West cartoons, even, and different shows that reach extremes in obscenity and profanity that are extremely problematic. For example, the series South Park, which, as you probably know, is about basically little children who are doing outrageous things. And of course, it's done to be very humorous. It thinks outside the box. Most people can't watch it without laughing, even if they don't like it. The people who do it are very intelligent. But, if you know anything about South Park, or if you've ever watched it, you know that it will put profanities and obscenities there for even children to see. Because since it's children that are the main people in South Park, children like to watch it. And often they find it very humorous. But they will be exposed to things, images that are absolutely outrageous, things which the ordinary adult, even if that adult lived an extremely worldly and maybe a very underworldly life, would never have imagined. So these things are extremely destructive and they're very harmful. And Imam al-Ghazali says then that so then he says that when we talk about obscenity, of course, usually we're talking, akramakumullah, about the exposition or the degradation of things that pertain to human sexuality. That's the most common. And then also to bodily functions. This is usually what obscenity and profanity focuses on. But he says also we have to be aware of the fact that obscene language, fuhsh, can also take in other things. And maybe some of these things are reprehensible and they're not forbidden, but we want to make sure to avoid them. And these are certain things that we say in order to embarrass people, or things that maybe we don't even mean to embarrass them, but they will embarrass them. So that's also a type of fuhsh. And he gives some really useful examples, and you could think of others, like stuttering. So if a person stutters, if a person stutters, it's very important not to laugh about that, or not to imitate that person, or not to say anything that draws attention to his or her stutter. And the same thing would be true about things like skin problems, or about discoloration, or about, this is Imam al-Ghazali, even things like pimples, or things like obesity, or things like a blind eye, or things like baldness, or things like, he says, hemorrhoids, or even a limp. So when people have things about them that they regard, or that people regard to be, ugly or less than beautiful, these are also things that in politeness and kindness we're very careful to avoid. Most people would know that naturally, right? Most people would never have to even be told about that, but a lot of times in popular culture, that's not the case. And so people may even be given a nickname that brings to light a particular defect they have, like stuttering, or like the fact that they're very short, or that they're very tall, or something else. So Imam al-Ghazali talks about the importance of politeness and kindness, talattuf, in the way we speak, the way we refer to things, not being too explicit about certain things, also using roundabout ways of speech. And then he notes that this is, of course, what the Quran does. In the Quran, and I would say that in Fusha, there is no profanity. The language is extremely clean, extremely good. And maybe traditional languages were all like that. I gave you examples of languages like Urdu, which was a court language of India, which is extremely polite. And it is not easy in Urdu, especially if you speak classical Urdu, to curse or to say things about people's parents. And there are African languages like that, the royal languages, in which you cannot use profanities. You cannot speak about certain things. That's not in their glossary. Of course, they could make up those words, and then you'd be ostracized, because they don't accept that kind of speech. And the Arabic language is like that as well. And as Imam al-Ghazali points out, the Quran is extremely telling in the way that it talks about things like bodily functions. Al-Gha'id, akramakum Allah. So the Gha'id, as you know, is the place you go to. It's not that function at all. And also the Quran uses words like, mubashara, and it uses words like mulamasa, and so forth. And these are words that are not explicit, and they're words that are very beautiful. So he says, you imitate that speech also, and the way that you talk about things. Imam al-Ghazali gives us an example which, like many things in the Ihya, opens up a window for us to the civilization that he belonged to. And he will say that many people in Sunni Persia, where he came from, they wouldn't even say, your wife told me. They would say, the mother of your children told me. So he uses that example as a beautiful talattuf, that of course there's nothing at all obscene to say that your wife told me something. But even because of their sensitivity to these things, and the desire to be dignified, and the desire to emphasize the dignity of people, they would prefer to say, the mother of your children told me such and such. Profanity and obscenity are types of ta'addi. They are types of going too far. They are types of aggression in word and deed. They spring from a desire to offend, a desire to abuse, idha. They violate personal and public sanctity, ultimately even religious sanctity. They reflect khubth, maliciousness and wickedness. They reflect lu'um, baseness and lowliness. They often spring from keeping bad company. Bad language and bad company go together. And often they spring from ignorance, that we don't know better. They are not characteristic of people who are tayyib and nabil, people that are high-minded and good. And there are many hadith about that. The Prophet said in a transmission in Sahih Muslim, Inna Allah yubghidu al-fahish al-mutafahish. Inna Allah yubghidu al-fahish al-mutafahish. God loathes the obscene person who spreads obscenities. Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah be pleased with him, would say, نزهوا أسماعكم عن استماع الخنا كما تنزهون ألسنتكم عن النطق به فإن المستمع شريك القائل. So Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah be pleased with him, said, نزهوا, keep your ears unpolluted, keep your ears clean from listening to profanity, al-khana, just as you keep your tongues unpolluted by speaking it. So we don't want to listen to these things, and this is a problem for us today. We talked about social media, of course we could talk about television and things like that. We can't really do without that. We've got to know what's going on in the world. We need to use these media, but so often it's very difficult to look at them without hearing things that you don't want to hear. Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais, may Allah be pleased with him, he was an early Muslim. He's actually not a Sahabi. He embraced Islam, I believe, in the days of Umar, and he was called Sayyid Tamim, Sayyid Bani Tamim. He was an extremely wise man, Banu Tamim, as you may know, was one of the biggest and most powerful of all the tribes of the Arabs. There's a statement, لولا الإسلام لأكلت تميم العرب. If it were not for Islam, Tamim would have devoured the Arabs alive. Very powerful tribe. And Al-Ahnaf ibn Qais is one of the most influential people who brought Tamim into Islam. And he was extremely wise. And he said, this is one of his hikmas, ألا أخبركم بأدوأ الداء اللسان البذيء والخلق الدني. Shall I not inform you of the sickest sickness of all? أدوأ الداء. The profane tongue and base character. May Allah protect us from that. And of course they go together. A desert Arab came to the Prophet ﷺ. This is a hadith that has a good transmission, said to be jayyid. And he asked the Prophet for counsel ﷺ. And the Prophet said to him, عليك بتقوى الله وإن امرؤ عيرك بشيء يعلمه فيك فلا تعيره بشيء تعلمه فيه يكن وباله عليه وأجره لك ولا تسبن شيئا. And this man says, فما سببت شيئا بعده. This is a beautiful hadith, and it's a good hadith, well transmitted. And he told the Bedouin, he said, you must hold to the taqwa of Allah, hold to God consciousness, to taqwa. And if a person reproaches you for something he knows to be in you, it's a fault you actually have, do not reproach him for something you know to be in him. Okay, so, maybe I'm that way. Well, you're that way too. Right? So he says, don't do that. That's a natural response. You said something about me, okay, well, I'll say something about you. And he said, so do not reproach him with something you know to be in him. Then the evil consequences, the wabal of this will be upon him, and his reward will be yours. And never revile, never speak ill of anything. In Arabic, you use sabba for people and also for countries and places. And he said, and after that, I never reviled anything again. And that's such a good thing to do. How are we for time?
4 minutes.
4 minutes. So let's open up the final topic we want to talk about, which is cursing. In English, cursing means to invoke harm or injury, suffering on something or someone. This is what the word means for us. In Arabic, the word la'ana means to put away, to put something at a distance, especially at a distance from God. It implies to ask for the damnation of a person and the complete lack of blessing or of good in them. And that is something that all of us understand. Imam al-Ghazali points out that you should never curse, and you should never make dua against people. And this is something that is very important, and is one of the characteristics, at least traditionally, of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that we do not like cursing. We do not like cursers, and we avoid that. In fact, many of our great scholars and saints would say that if the person or whatever does things that are so bad that you feel you have to curse, then you say, Allahumma amilhu bima yastahiq. Oh God, treat him as he deserves to be treated. But don't go further than that. So this is a very important thing. You don't make dua against people and don't curse people. Now, one of the things that Imam al-Ghazali tells us about is that silence is again the safest policy. And he points out that Ibn Awn, who was a great early Muslim, I don't remember if he was a successor or what he was, but he was done great harm by a particular Umayyad judge and administrator. And this judge really harmed him, really hurt him. And so once Ibn Awn was in the presence of people who loved him, and they began to talk about this man, whose name was Ibn Abi Burda, and they began to curse him and to speak evil of him. But Ibn Awn didn't say anything. And then they said that, well, we only cursed him because of what he did to you, that is worthy of his being cursed. And Ibn Awn said, إنما هما كلمتان تخرجان من صحيفتي يوم القيامة لا إله إلا الله ولعن الله فلانا فلأن يخرج من صحيفتي لا إله إلا الله أحب إلي من أن يخرج لعن الله فلانا. But this is very, very beautiful. He says that when I go back to God on the day of judgment, I don't want two words to come out of my sahifa, my book. La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah, and then God curse Ibn Abi Burda. He said, no, I would rather go back and have the only thing that comes out of my sahifa, La ilaha illallah. This is something that all of us, should, I'm sure we're all of this mind, and we should always be careful about that. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in a Hasan hadith, al-mu'minu laysa bil-la'an. The believer is not a curser. The believer is not given to cursing. And people who do curse, there's always a great question about the validity of their faith. One of the unfortunate things in some Muslim societies is that cursing has become very common. I remember once when I was in Jeddah, I had our neighbors that lived below us. They were from another Arab country. And I'm not going to say what country they were from. They weren't Egyptians, I'll say that. But Sheikh Hamza and I, were going to the mosque, and so we shut my door. We walked downstairs. The neighbors had their door open. And we walked out of the house, and Sheikh Hamza said, did you hear what they said? Unfortunately, even if I had, I'm so bad at dialect that I wouldn't have understood. Sheikh Hamza is very good. He understands the dialects very well. He said they were cursing their children. They were cursing their children. And I know myself that there are sometimes Muslim schools in which a teacher may curse the children. And there are cases, when other people will curse you because of what you do. And what extreme foolishness this is. This is not the way that we are. This is not the way we were taught to be. لا تلاعنوا بلعنة الله لا ببغضه ولا بجهنم. The Prophet said, do not curse each other with the curse of God. Or with loathing, or with Jahannam. Of course, in English people say, go to hell. Why would you say that to anybody? This is Jahannam, right? You don't want that. And in fact, in English, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to say the words, but very common that people say, may I go there, may I be, and we won't say what that word is. But, these words mean something, and we have to be very careful. Imam al-Ghazali notes that in his time, many Muslims had come to take cursing lightly, and you should never do that. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're probably out of time, but let's take a little bit more if you don't mind. I just want to read a couple of hadith, and then we'll stop for questions. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was traveling with his Sahaba, and one of the men cursed his camel. maybe because it didn't go fast enough or whatever. And the Prophet said, Ya Abd-Allah, لا تسير معنا على بعير ملعون. So he said, O servant of God, do not travel with us on an accursed camel. Again, it's like people who curse, they don't understand that God hears that this is an invocation, and that God will answer this. And in another hadith, a woman of the Ansar was traveling with the Prophet ﷺ in a group, and she became irritated with her camel and cursed it. The Prophet said, he said, take off all that is on the camel, the saddle and everything, and let her go free with nothing on her, for she is accursed. Okay, you cursed the camel, so now get off the camel and let the camel go. You know, why would you want to ride a camel that you've cursed? So again, it's like this woman no doubt did this as a habit, and the Prophet wants to show his companions, this habit's got to be broken. In fact, people say that this was a lesson to her and others, and also that you don't think your dua was accepted. You made a dua to Allah to curse your camel, and so don't expect to find good in it after that. Let's end with this particular statement, and then inshallah we can maybe come back to this next time and continue on to the next topic. Abu Darda, may Allah be pleased with him, used to say, ما لعن أحد الأرض إلا قالت لعن الله أعصانا لله. Very, very problematic. No person accuses. Abu Darda said, no one curses the earth or a particular land, but that the earth will say, God, curse that one of us who is the most disobedient to you. And no matter what country we are talking about, and no matter how ugly it might look, or how desolate, it doesn't disobey God. And none of us can say that about ourselves, can we? So may Allah enable us to benefit from Imam al-Ghazali. This is very good counsel, and may he make us aware, much more aware than we have ever been, of how we speak. May he make our words speak words of truth and of sincerity. May he bless all of us, especially myself, so that what we say is true, what we say is not exaggerated, and what we say is also not superfluous. Let's stop now, and inshallah we'll see if we can have some questions. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, first of all, does anybody want to ask a question out loud? Hazim. Okay, Hazim. Make it easy. Don't make it difficult.
Question about stilted language and obscure language.
About what? Yes, okay, I've got it. Stilted language and obscure language.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءَ كُلَّهَا, which means that we should call everything by its name, correct? So there is this trend of reversing the names of things, and I wanted to know if that falls under that same category of stilted language.
Jazakallah kulla khair. That's a very, very good question. علم آدم الأسماء كلها. So God taught Adam all of the names. And of course this means also that God taught Adam language. Verbs come out of nominals. And particles of speech, they work in the world of nominals and verbs. So Adam alayhi salam was given the gift of language. And of course his children were given this miraculous gift. Do people create language? Was language created? This is an ancient debate. Languages are amazing. and languages are amazingly different. And I would say that none of them is within the capacity of a human being to create. They're simply too marvelous. And as we said before, and I'll try to come to your question, that one of the things that you should never forget is the more ancient the language, the richer the language, the purer the language. That's true of Arabic, which is an extremely ancient language. Arabic is more ancient than the language of Pharaoh, which belongs to the same family. Arabic is more ancient than the language of Babylon and Assyria. And Arabic as spoken by the Prophet ﷺ, we would say, based on comparative linguistics, was probably at least 10,000 years old, at least, based on things like the migration of the Semites, the migration of the ancient Egyptians, who came out of Arabia, by the way, even though they were not Arabs. They're another people. So language is an amazing thing. God taught Adam the names of all words. And when you look at a language like Arabic, it's amazing how the words so perfectly speak to what they talk about. Okay? La ilma bila amal, wala amal bila ilm. So we see that here, ilm, knowledge, ayn lam mim, it has a metaphysical connection to ayn mim lam, which is amal. That's not by chance. That's because of the fact that these letters are connected to cosmic realities. Okay? So, la ilma bila amal, wala amal bila ilm. Okay? Arabic is an amazing language, and it isn't, as Umar would say, it is a language of intellect, and it is a language of muru'ah, which is virtue of men and women. Okay? It's a great language. So today, as Hazm pointed out, one of the things that we see is the fundamental alteration of words. And, this is, as we said, the reign of the plastic words. Words that, first of all, we don't really know what they mean. We use the example of nature. That nature is a good word. There's nothing wrong with nature. What's wrong with that? And in fact, in Islam, we talk about tabi'ah, and we define tabi'ah. Okay? But nature in the discourse of the 19th and 20th century is a cop-out. Because when you look at the natural world, it is full of design. It is full of what we call complex, specified information, DNA. The DNA molecule, we know, is in every organic living thing. Even the dinosaurs, even viruses have part of the DNA molecule. And this DNA molecule is so complex, even in an amoeba, that it is more complex than your laptop or the best computer that you can imagine. That happens by chance? It's impossible. A mousetrap, and you know how simple the mousetrap is. It's complex, specified information. Because if anything in those, 6 parts of the mousetrap is not right, the mousetrap doesn't work. The mousetrap can't just have happened. It can't just have fallen from heaven. It had to be designed. It had to be a designer. And that's true of DNA. And that's true, this world is finely tuned to an extent that modern physics talks about a great deal. We talk today in modern physics about the anthropic principle. And what they mean by the anthropic principle is the fact that everything out there seems to be made with us in mind. Now, the way they interpret that is very strange, but we won't get into that. The thing is that, for example, in the balance between a proton, between an electron and a proton, the balance cannot be off more than 1 part to 100 billion parts. If it is, the atom blows up. So look at this world around us. It's made up, we believe, of atoms and molecules, and every one of them is finely tuned to the nth degree. So that happened by chance? Who would believe that? That happened by natural causation, and of course, in Islam we even talk about what is natural causation. Okay? Natural causation, if it were doing these things, could only reproduce itself. It can't produce multiplicity. It cannot produce complexity. So there has to be the other possibility, design. Okay, but if you talk about design, you have to talk about a designer. And so let's not do that. That would be very uncomfortable, because then wouldn't that designer be God? Who else could it be? So we say nature. And here, nature is a plastic word. It has lots of beautiful connotations. It serves many purposes, but it has no denotation, because I want to know about nature. Is it animate or inanimate? Does it have knowledge or not? Is it created or uncreated? Is it one or two? Does it make demands on my life? Should I worship nature or not? These are the natural questions. And in fact, natura, which in English is the word we get nature from, was a goddess. So this is a very, very important thing. And we could talk about many words that have been changed fundamentally. They don't mean what they used to mean. And they're used for usually ideological purposes. So is that adequate for you? Or you want something else that you'd like to say?
For instance, when we talk about riba, and they say in Arabic, faida, al-faida. So it completely makes it seem okay for people to, like in that sense, or when you say something on the news, the insurgents, we killed the insurgents. So
Yeah, and there are many examples of that. We talked about pacification. And I remember in the United States years ago when General Motors talked about built-in obsolescence. And it's like, what it meant is that your car's got built-in obsolescence. It means that it'll be good for 5 years, and after 5 years it's going to start breaking down. McNamara, who's the one who introduced that, was so proud because it means that you're going to have to buy from General Motors another car. And General Motors, if things are good for General Motors, they're good for the United States. Of course, fortunately, maybe the Japanese came to the rescue. So you can build cars with built-in obsolescence, but we'll try to give you a car that you can depend on for 10 or 20 years. And then General Motors decided that maybe we better get rid of that word and get rid of that policy. Anyway, jazakallah khair. Any other questions that people would like to ask? Yeah, wa alaikum salam.
How does profanity affect the heart?
How does profanity affect the heart? How do you think?
It soils it?
I would say exactly the same thing. That profanity is filth, and profanity makes the heart filthy. And when the heart is not clean, the heart cannot understand. And when the heart is not clean, the heart takes joy, it finds pleasure in things that an ordinary person wouldn't find pleasure in. We mentioned before that some people, they enjoy lying. They enjoy lying so much that they cannot escape it. And often they will speak lies that they even know that you must know are lies. And this is a reflection of the heart. Because when the heart becomes extremely unclean, it takes pleasure in lying. So profanity is one of those things that pollutes the heart beyond imagination. And again, may Allah protect us from pornography. Pornography is extremely destructive. And it is a huge problem in this time. It has horrible effects on us, deep psychological effects. you know, I know of an example of a young man in a Muslim community who was very strong, very athletic, and he got married to a very beautiful woman, very attractive woman, akramakumullah. He could not consummate his marriage. And of course this was a tremendous shame for him and his family, because unfortunately it came to light. Okay, what was the problem? Pornography. Because everyone knew that this boy was addicted to pornography. And this is one of the effects it has too, is impotence. You know, it has many effects. It affects people differently. But also images are extremely important in our psychology. So you want to have beautiful images in your mind. You don't want to have obscene and profane images in your mind. And they will hurt you. And they will affect you. And, you know, so inshallah, Allah protect us from this. So this person says, I'm going to change the language a little bit. Don't you find that a lot of the debates between various Muslim parties today, you might say extremists and non-extremists and other people, end up with a lot of mirat. There's a lot of contentiousness and argumentativeness and disputation. How do we bring a civil discussion to the table? That's it. I thank you for this question. It's a very good question. And, you know, I believe, you know, have got to try to find the way to have honest discourse. And as we feel strongly about what we believe in. And I believe very strongly in the tradition of Islam as transmitted by the great imams and the great civilizations of Islam. This involves Sufism, it involves Ash'ari Aqidah, Maturidi Aqidah. It involves many things. I believe in that, and of course I have the right to believe in that. There are other people who don't believe in that at all, and they reject it out of hand. Usually they reject it without knowing what it is. And often they reject it because the least beautiful word that you can say. So it's very important for us not to be partisans. You know, my tribe, right or wrong, my nation, right or wrong. That, you know, today when we want to talk about Islam in the Muslim world, no matter if we are Sufis or we don't like the Sufis at all, it's very important. So it's important for us to try to find an arena where we can speak the truth. And we should never be partisans. Ta'assub is a veil that obstructs the heart. And you know, you may feel ta'assub because of the fact that you know that the thing that you feel that for is true. And I would say that, you know, there are so many things in the Islamic tradition that are definitely true. And you know, it's natural that you would champion them. But when it becomes ta'assub, so that it's party spirit, then immediately there is a veil that is there. Even if that thing that we are championing is true. So the important thing about this question, I believe, is that we need to seek a discourse. And that's why it's important for us to try to open up the doors of discourse with everyone. And not just to speak to ourselves, not just to lecture to the choir, but you know, people who don't agree with us. It's very good if we can talk. And again, one of the great things about Islamic civilization is adabul khilaf. This was one of our hallmarks, and it had to be because we believed always in Islam that there are certain things we will never agree on. in the dhanniyat, which make up the greater part of the prophetic message. A particular thing has more than one interpretation. The Prophet said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, "Man ahya ardan fahiya lah." Whoever brings fallow land to life, it's his. Is that a qat'i statement or a dhanni statement in terms of its meaning, its dalala? It's a strongly established hadith. There's no question about its sahha. But the dalala, the meaning of the hadith, is it qat'i, in that it has one meaning and no other? Or is it dhanni, meaning it has to be interpreted? What would you say? This is one of our problems with extremists, because they take everything as if it were qat'i, my way or the highway. And most things are not like that. But if you say, whoever brings fallow earth, land to life, okay, well, what if that fallow land is in your backyard? What if that fallow land is within your fence? What if that fallow land is in the harim of the city? Traditional Islamic cities had a harim, which we can call a green zone. A green zone. So around the city, there would be an area, often it's established by the distance that a family that has a relative, an ordinary flock of sheep, can take those sheep, the distance they can take them to in the daytime and get back to the city by nighttime. Okay, maybe in springtime, when the day and night are relatively equal. The fuqaha talk about that. This will be the harim. This is the green zone. It's like what we call in English the commons. So there, you can't build a house. And that's fallow land, but you can't bring it to life. So what does the hadith say about that? You can't go into the harim and you can't make it your own land. If you want to do that, you would have to have special permission from the ruler or from the administration. And they might do that and say, expand it. That's their business. But without that, you can't do it. Your house has a harim. Your well had a harim. If you had a well, there had to be an area around it that was a commons, so that people could come and drink from your well. Because water, all people have a right to access to it. This is why, if you go to some Muslim countries, let's say Al-Andalus, where you have many houses that still are the houses that were built by the Muslims, you will see that they have fountains that come out of the house into the street. Why do they do that? Well, they're charitable. Yes, they're charitable, but they had to do that by Islamic law. Why? Because they have a well in their house. And because they had a well in their house, you have a right to drink from their well. Okay, but do they want to let you in their house? No. That would be extremely difficult. So therefore, they have to run a pipe from the well out to the street, so that the people in the street can also drink from the well. And usually there would be a pool or a big container under that, which is filled with water, so that people can just take out some water and go. This is the way it was. So this hadith then is dhanni. And Imam al-Shafi'i has his interpretation. Imam Malik has his. Imam Abu Hanifa has his. That this applies to certain conditions. It has certain circumstances. Most of the law is like that. And because of that, we have to respect each other. That there are certain things that we not only will have different opinions in, but we have to have different opinions in. And then as civilized people, we will respect each other in that. And this is why Islam was able to put together this miracle of unity and multiplicity, unity and diversity. And it was able to create a world in which Muslims were diverse, and they had different cultures, and they had different languages, but you could always tell, these are your brothers. This is your civilization. Even though in China, it looks so different than it does in Egypt, or it looks so different in Egypt than it does in, let's say, Morocco or Spain. This is toleration. And this is respect for differences and different opinions. And may Allah give us that today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So a very good question. I don't know what else to say. I just know that we need to work towards this. We need to find ways to speak to everybody. We are so divided. We are so contentious. We are so argumentative. And this is tearing us apart. We ask Allah to enable us to try to bring things together. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Well, this is a question that is very good. الدعاء هل هو يمنع القدر؟ إذا لعن أحدهم هل يلبي الرب هذا؟ It's a very good question. We will actually talk about this hopefully tomorrow. When you curse someone, or you say that someone is a disbeliever, if the curse will either strike them or it will strike you. And if we say that this person's a kafir, maybe they are, although we don't like to talk like that. But if they're not, then you will be. This is why the takfiri is the biggest fool of all. Because you think that he or she will be able to maintain their faith? Maybe some of the people that they do takfir of are actually that way, but many times they're not. And most of the times they're not. And then it comes back like a boomerang. Does the dua impede destiny? Al-Qadr. The Prophet ﷺ told us that nothing can change Qadr except the dua. So this is the special gift you have. That you can make dua and you can change the world. Okay, this is the gift of the dua. And when you make dua, part of the adab of the dua is certainty, yaqeen. Ud'uni astajib lakum. Call upon me, I will answer you. So the adab of dua is have no doubt. What you're doing is not just a formality. What you're doing is a cosmic act as the daughter or the son of Adam. And our ulama talk about that well, how is that possible? Allah knows from before the creation of the heavens and the earth what will be and what won't be, and that's written in the lawh, and this is called the qada, and the qadr is when that happens in time. But what our ulama say is there's also kitab. There is the foundation book, the foundational book, the mother of the book. And this also includes your dua. That this is the way things will be. This is the way you might say things would have been. Until my blessed servant, you made the dua sincerely. And then God, to honor you before creation, makes you the sabab to recalibrate the qadr. And so he knew that too, but it was hidden from the angels. It was hidden in that first display, so that you would be brought to light, and the things that you do would be brought to light. And we read the news, and the news breaks our hearts, and the news hardens our hearts. And what a big problem this is. The natural human being has natural responses. And in traditional societies, we always express those natural responses. And of course, we have a culture that doesn't, that makes the thing that we respond to happen in a certain set of circumstances usually. Okay, so in our society, for example, if you see a person injured or killed or wounded, that's going to move you, right? It will move you to tears. It may, move you to, it may make you sleepless. You can't help but respond to that. And this is natural. Again, when we see these images over and over again, then also we don't have that response anymore. We become numb to that. And this is very, very harmful. and it affects our human relations. We don't even respond to each other naturally. Maybe even, akramakumullah, husband and wife, they don't respond to each other naturally. And this is because of the effect of the images and the other things that they're continually seeing. The thing is that when we read the news or we hear the news and we're exposed to these things, maybe we talk about it, we read another newspaper, maybe we call our friends, did you look at CNN? Did you see the thing that happened? And that's all natural human response. But then also, where is this? If, for example, Gaza is being blown off the face of the earth, so where are your hands? What can you do? What can you possibly do? Well, you can pray. At least that's the least you can do. And also, you must be sure that this does have an effect. It may not show up in tomorrow's news, but we cannot neglect that. And the dua does have the power to alter the qadr because of the status that you have with God. And inshallah, we'll talk a little bit more about the second part of the question tomorrow. In seeking to become a better Muslim on all levels, is it enough to work on creating a strong spiritual connection, or does a good Muslim have to be aware of the laws, the madhahib, the history, and so forth of Islam? If you're sick, if you have a problem, generally speaking, sometimes we have complex sicknesses. We're sick with more than one thing. It's very important to begin with what is most critical and gradually to move. And it's very important to be merciful to ourselves. If, for example, we have a problem with sugar, or we have a problem with obesity, you're not going to change that in a day. It takes time. And therefore, you begin by little steps. Imam al-Ghazali talks about overeating. And he says, let's say you eat 2 loaves of bread a day. And of course, the loaves, the raghif he's talking about, is like the raghif you have here in Egypt. So, maybe we ate 3 or 4 today. But he said, if you eat 2 and you want to reduce it to 1. So he says, don't just do that in a day. So he said, take the 1 loaf, raghif of bread, and you enjoy that. And the other one, he said, why don't you cut it 29 parts? And tomorrow, 28. And the next day, 1 loaf and 27. Okay, slowly. So this is very important, that whenever we want to change and we want to make ourselves better, that's a good thing. And may Allah bless us, and may He make it easy. But you have to also be easy on yourself in that. And don't go too fast, and don't be too hard. Because usually that leads to the opposite. It usually, maybe you won't succeed. And one of the things that Dr. Sherman Jackson, Dr. Abdul-Hakim Jackson says, and I love Dr. Jackson very much, he's a master of words. He is a coiner of words, and his words are good, but very powerful. For example, I wrote a paper that some of you know about called Islam and the Cultural Imperative. And I have another one called Living Islam with Purpose that also talks about culture and the cultural imperative. And in that, I say Islam is not culturally predatory. Okay, where did I get that word? Dr. Jackson. He is the one who, and as soon as I heard that, I wrote it down, and it's like, if you want me to pay for this word, how much do you want? I was reading another author who talks about modernism. And again, we're not against the modern age in any way. It has so many benefits, but it also has in it problems. One of them is reductionism. You know, that we don't believe in what we can't see, touch, taste, hear, or smell. That's reductionism. And so one particular scholar talks about the systematic superficiality of the secular age. And again, it's like, may I use your word? How much do you want me to pay? This scholar's not even alive anymore. But it's like, I'd be happy to pay for that word. Superficial, systematic superficiality. Again, just as we were saying, what you were saying before, Hazm, just as words are misused, you have other people who are using words correctly. And that's so important to do that. It's so important to do that. Before I became a Muslim, you know, I studied such totally impractical topics. Unfortunately, I was an extremely impractical person. And I was in college in the 1960s, and a lot of us were that way. You know, we were interested in not plastic words, but unbelievable things like truth. Really? You might not know that, but we were. And we had friends. I wasn't a Muslim, but we had a group of people, and we studied hard, and we loved our professors. And we wanted to know, what is the truth? Especially because a lot of things were being revealed. Even things, for example, about American history. This was the time of Vietnam, and we were against the war in Vietnam, and we were opposed to certain things that was foreign policy. And we felt like that we cannot support this, and we can't be lied to. And we had professors who were quite honest about these things. And so I know that we had friends. We'd get together, we would study hard, and then we would go to have coffee. And what did we talk about? What we studied that day, and what professor's really good, and which one you want to take next semester. But so unfortunately, my specialization was totally impractical, practical things like history and like literature. And I love literature, and I love literature especially because I felt this may give me insight into the truth more than philosophy and more than psychology, you know. But one of the things that was really clear at that time, and those of you who've studied English literature, you know about this, is the fact that in modern literature, in English, T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, Gerald Manley Hopkins, and others, there is a huge concern with the death of poetic language. You know, that we cannot be poetic anymore. And will we ever be poetic again? And when I became a Muslim, and then all of a sudden, these concepts that poets talk about become real. And, you know, your metaphysics of your world is alive. You know, then these words mean things again. And one of the things that I felt is that if Islam would ever spread among English speakers, poetry will be one of the first things to revive. And one of the great things that we've seen in the 1990s and, you know, in this century among Muslims, we have a lot of really good Muslim poets. A lot of really good Muslim poets. But also you have other people that are really good in poetry too. And I think that this is all because of the rediscovery of meaning. In any case, yes. Okay, well, maybe we can come back to your question tomorrow, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, but the thing is that, you know, priorities are very important. And the thing I wanted to say that Dr. Jackson has said, I'm sorry to get off the topic so much, but he said that a broken rule can be set right by tawbah, but a broken psyche cannot be set right by tawbah. So this is why, you know, we live in a very difficult society, a very difficult time. And there's all kinds of confusion. There's all kinds of difficulties. So, you know, we have to be very careful and very balanced in the way we do things. And when we are not, and this does happen to some people, happens sometimes to converts, it happens sometimes to Muslims who are not converts, but they take a path that is so difficult even if they're sincere, even if they have a good teaching, that they break their psyches. Have you ever seen that? I have. And it really breaks your heart. You know, that maybe, I know of a woman, you know, who was so sincere. She wanted to do everything. But in the end, she couldn't sustain it. And she lost her mind. Even to the extent that she couldn't take care of her children, and she began to act as if she was suicidal. Even though if you told her that, she would say, no, this is tawakkul. She would even walk in front of a bus. Tawakkul. No, you know that's not tawakkul. And she was broken, psychologically broken. So, you know, you never forget your own vulnerability. Never forget your own fragility. And especially those of your friends and the people you love. And that's why in Islam we also have priorities. What is the first priority? Learn to know God. You know, learn to know why we know He exists. You know, what His attributes are. You know, how creation is made, why it's made. Because this is what will bring you to life. This is the first obligation. Knowing God, knowing the prophets, knowing about the unseen. What is the garden? What is the fire? Why do we believe in that? Why can we say that that is rational and not irrational? These are very important things. And then after that, you have the other priorities that come. So may Allah enable us to do things right. It's very important, you know, to be together. It's very important to help each other. It's very important to do what you do, which is to take other people's hands, to help other people, okay? And not just to leave them to themselves, and not to push them into things that they can't take. I know a person, you know, some people, Imam al-Ghazali told us, you know, that be careful how you talk about your trips, your travels, don't exaggerate. I often exaggerate, may Allah forgive me. You know, a person came here the other day, a young man who wanted to go to a very difficult place to study. And he's been told basically that that place is paradise. And I know it's not. I've been there. And I know that they have deep cultural problems. And you have problems with the scholars there of hypocrisy and of other things. And you try to cross the border into the country and see how many bribes you have to pay. So again, I don't want to mention that country because I know that country has a lot of good in it. And I don't want to go down as backbiting that country. But the thing is that who told him that? Because of the fact that this man is a young, innocent person who also probably doesn't have very much money. They may take away all of his money at the airport. I've seen it happen. I know it's happened. Okay? So he's been taught a never land story about this country, and he may go there, and it could be his end. I know people who've gone there and died, and people, because they weren't helped, and they had no money, and people say, oh, we don't have anything, we can't help you. They lived in rooms that stank, and they had no food. Okay, so again, you know, be honest about what you say. You know, there may be there in that country, and there are really good people, but did you give him the addresses? Did you give him the money? Did you tell him how to do that? But, you know, just to speak in general glowing terms about certain parts of the world, as if you go there, you'll be in the age of the Sahaba. That's not right. That's not real. So, and again, you know, if that person is broken, who will be responsible? So may Allah make us very careful about what we say, honest about what we say, and helpful to other people and caring. اللهم وفقنا لما تحبه وترضاه وجعلنا من عبيدك السعداء وأمتنا على كلمة الهدى علمنا ما ينفعنا ووفقنا للعمل بما علمتنا به واجعل ما نحن فيه خالصا مخلصا لوجهك الكريم يا رب العالمين اللهم اجعل تجمعنا هذا تجمعا مرحوما وتفرقنا بعده تفرقا معصوما لا شقيا منا ولا محروما آمين آمين يا رب العالمين. Thank you again for the honor of your presence, and hope to see you in the nights ahead بإذن الله تعالى if you can make it, and may you have a very beautiful